Welcome everyone to Bounce Off, the number one SlamBall podcast in the world. I am your host, Sam Roberts. You can find me on social media at Quantum Roberts. That's QUANTUM Roberts. We're here to talk about all the action that went down in last night's Sunday night episode of SlamBall from Week 3. We will go more in depth on Week 3 overall when we have an episode of This Week in SlamBall, which should come out later this week. But today, we're talking about the headlines, and the headlines are: the Lava erupt for their first wins in the league, the Ozone are hyped, McGee gets held behind, power rankings, and team of the week for Week 3 here on Bounce Off. Excited to get into all those. Quick disclaimer, that team of the week is our personal one, and by our, I mean me, not the SlamBall League team of the week, which they will announce later on today, I'm sure. One little bit of housekeeping or like just league news before we get into things. I don't know if it was already the case prior to last night or prior to Saturday night, I should say. But it was officially announced at the beginning of the broadcast last night that the Mob have clinched not only a bye in the first round of the playoffs, which is what happens if you're in the top two seeds, but they have also clinched that first overall seed. So they are definitively, they've got the best regular season record. Impossible for anyone to beat them now. I'm pretty sure it was already the case that was how it was even before Saturday, but that's all official now. Excited to get into that, and excited to get into last night's game. So we started with Wrath versus Ozone, and this game actually opened with an interesting bit of news, which was the first ever in-season trade in the history of SlamBall. Greg Helt from the Lava has been traded to the Wrath in exchange for Ermias Kasa. I am interested in this trade. I kind of like it, although the fruits have not yet bore after night one for the Wrath. So I think in terms of addition, it's better for the Wrath. I think in terms of subtraction, it's better for the Lava. So what do I mean by that? Well, I was very high on Greg Helt as a bigger guy who can shoot a lot, right? I think he's been held back this season presentation-wise because he was put in a lot of bad positions with the Lava where he was expected to try and win the game in a lot of their close games, he was given the ball and it didn't go well. And that makes him look bad when in reality that was one of the few opportunities he had all game. He is now playing stopper for the Wrath. He has been brought in because they've got so many injuries, including their first round pick in Christian Gray, who is a stopper-gunner combo, and Sean Stith, who was playing their starter-stopper minutes. And so as a result, they've had to play Trey Landers at stopper, which hasn't been going well. So I think this trade for Greg Helt is good from that perspective. I think from the Lava perspective, I know that Coach Carlson had said to me that sometimes Greg Helt can be his own worst enemy. Maybe there was some issues within the team as a result of that. I doubt it, but it wouldn't surprise me given on this night of all nights after they've traded Helt in exchange for Kasa. Kasa barely played, didn't really contribute to the team, but the Lava had two huge wins that we'll get into later. And by contrast, the Wrath didn't play as well. The Wrath lost this game 36-68 to the Ozone. Credit to the Ozone. And the biggest thing coming out of this game was obviously stopper play. The Ozone, we've talked about this season, have got a strategy where they start the game with Keenan Love. The second quarter, they bring in Vincent Bowman. Two very different types of stopper. Keenan Love, springy, gets into the air, very active while he's up there. Vincent Bowman, the biggest player in the league, a big physical presence that totally disrupts your bounce in the tramps, not intentionally, but just based on his size. And so swapping those guys quarter to quarter and then bringing in Keenan Love for final minute plays where it's important has been really good for the Ozone so far. And that was a big thing for them in this game. Keenan Love forced a lot of shot clock violations on the Wraths, like in terms of Wrath offensive possession. Keenan Love, being a disruptor, blocking shots at the rim, really disrupted what the Wrath were trying to do. They were getting opportunities to score, but they weren't able to convert those, partially on them, partially because of this great disruption from Keenan Love. So really good from them. On the alternative end, the Wrath don't have any consistency. Again, Trey Landers is not a stopper by trade, but he was asked to play that role. Greg Helt, while he was originally listed as a stopper, has spent the season playing gunner for the Lava. So he's not got in-game reps as much in that role. So the Wrath are really going to struggle if they can't shore up that defense. the Ozone have got a really good defense going with those two guys switching in and out. And all the movement that they've got around there. I think Keith McGee's dunks, obviously Keith McGee is an amazing scorer. He scored a huge amount this weekend. We'll talk about him a little bit later on. But he is an amazing scorer. Q Cotton is a guy who you don't always notice, but he's doing bits in every game. I mentioned earlier this season that Marcus Gray is a guy who gets like underappreciated from like a viewership standpoint for what he brings to this team. And Brian Bell Anderson, who I was really harsh on early on, he has bounced back hugely. Even after he himself admitted that weekend one wasn't his best game. I think he started, like, since that, he's had more games where he's had double-digit scoring than games where he hasn't. And the games where he hasn't, it's been like 8 and 9 points. So he's definitely improved a lot on the offensive end. And that is exciting to see. What's not exciting to see as a guy who is a fan of the Wrath is I hate that there's now this thing where we always have to go to see what James Willis is saying in the huddle, because he's so depressing. He's so depressing in the huddle. And it is because they keep going to him when the team's losing. He said the phrase ass whipping again. Both times they've gone to him in the huddle, it's when the Wrath are down and they just want to hear him say, this is an ass whipping. But he just basically goes, you know what's going on. And they're like, what? And he's like, we're losing. And it's just so depressing every time they cut to him. And I'm like, oh no. Cut to him when we're winning a game, please. That would be so much better. The Wrath, they were advised very early on by their coach. He said, like going into the third, I think it was, he said, keep it simple, right? Or even maybe, I think it was pre-game, it was part of the pre-game huddle. He said, keep it simple, stupid, right? Very direct. Your offense should just be, go with what we normally do, run at the basket, go for the basket, score, and this thing will be easy. It was not easy for them. Their leading scorer in Ty McGee, who hasn't scored under 20 points in any game he's played this season, only scored 17. That's still a decent amount, but that's a decent amount on a team where you have other scoring options, and the Wrath don't have that. It's all McGee, it's a little bit of Darian Slade when they've got a two-man game going, and it's Nick Parks as like a third option. Realistically, he's your secondary option, but Darian Slade's the guy who's moving the ball in that situation. And the Ozone, again, in particular, shout out to Keenan Love and his disruptive ability under the basket. Totally shut out the Wrath. So good for them. Really, really good for them in this game. I still don't know how I feel, right? I talked about, in my preamble, in my headlines, I said the Ozone are hyped. And they are. And I still don't know how I feel about that. Because and this is coming from a place of, I've never been the guy, when it comes to sports, who gets braggy about when I'm up. I'd rather just win. And maybe that's because I've come from teams that don't win. And so there's we're winning, let's just win the game. Versus other teams who are like, I'm going to talk trash, I'm going to get in your face, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And with the Ozone, we've seen mixed results. And this is particularly against the Wrath, right? Who these two teams have got an ongoing feud. It's kind of a feud that's taken their coaches back to 2003. But there's also been some pre-season, jawing between the two teams, including Ty McGee chipping some teeth and stuff like that. So these teams don't like each other. And this seems to be when the Ozone are always loud. They're always shouting Ozone at the crowd, trying to get a fan base, which is great. But I don't know how I feel about it from a competitive standpoint. I think it's good when you're winning, but even then that then feels it feels rude. I'm too polite. I can't do trash talk, I'm too polite. So I don't know how I feel about it, because they did it in the previous game with the Wrath, and then the Wrath smoked them in the second half because they were just straightforward and serious. In this game, the Ozone were doing it throughout the game. Brian Bell Anderson got told off by the referees that if he kept talking to the Wrath bench, he was going to get a tech. Keith McGee gets a really good dunk at the dying embers of the game and decides to do a backflip on the Tramps just to show off. And I think it's fine in this setting because it's a rivalry and you want this to happen. And even if one team is joying and the other team's not, that's still a narrative thing of, this is the team that barks, this is the team that doesn't, and let's see how they do. So I don't know if it's good or bad. I just know that that's not how I like to do sports. And that's just a personal thing. That doesn't have any impact on the team. Just the first time we saw, if anything, the first time we saw this, they end up losing the game and they were jawing too much and they weren't disciplined enough. And this time they did it when they were up and they managed to stay up because they had that confidence, right? And I think that confidence is something that will treat them well going towards the playoffs. Having confidence even in games where this team had only had one win going into last night. And even at the end of the game, their coach was saying, are we surprised? No, we're not surprised. We're this damn good. And it's like, this is your second win of the season. But to have that confidence is a really good thing when you start to go into single game elimination. It just needs to be confidence combined with poise. So really good win for the Ozone here. Dominated the Wrath defensively. Great job from Keenan Love. Great job from Vincent Bowman. Great scoring distribution amongst the players on the offensive end. And the Wrath just need to find something when it comes to their stopper play. There's no word from the league ever when it comes to injuries ahead of game night. Like a tweet just with an injury update would be great. So we have no idea until, like, first of all, we don't know what the schedule is for this weekend. But second of all, we won't know until the Wrath's first game what the Haps is. But you'd really like to see Sean Stith come back, maybe Christian Gray. I think minimum you need Sean Stith, because if you have Sean Stith under the basket and Ty McGee at the other basket, that's a really good sign. Part of the problem for the Wrath defensively right now, I've talked in previous episodes about Ty McGee plays his defense really high up the court, almost across the halfway line, so that he can make a hit on a guy with the ball, and then if there's a transition opportunity, a fast break opportunity, he gets the ball very quickly. What I started to notice in this game is that it's the whole Wrath front line that plays very high. You would Slade, McGee, and Parks all around the halfway line. And if the other team brings up their stopper to be part of the offense in the half court, think like Gage Smith does or like Faisal Shafat does in these games tonight for the Lava, that then creates a 4-on-3 on the perimeter. And so if an offensive guy slips past you, it's just one pass over the top and then it's one-on-one against the stopper. And if you've got a team where, as we've talked about, the Wrath don't have a stopper per se, or they don't have anyone who is comfortable and confident enough at that position to be elite, then getting the ball past that first line defense and straight at the basket is a very bad sign for the Wrath. So they need to figure out alternative options there. Overall, there's a lot of great offensive weapons for the Ozone. Their defensive weapons equally good. And I think that there's a lot of development. Again, they're comfortable. They're getting more comfortable with their offense as the season goes on. Their stoppers were already good and the strategy's interesting, but they're improving. Brian Bell Anderson's getting so much better. Keith McGee is staying consistent with when he gets scoring opportunities, he's getting a lot of points, and when he's not, it's sort of 50-50. Q Cotton is a really nice punch, and Marcus Gray is really good as well. They did great in this game, and to add to that, they also could have scored more. There was a lot of calls that like the coaches were even saying to the referees, like, how's that two? How's that two? How's that two? Because there was so many times that the Ozone were getting called for 2-pointers when it was like, could it be two? Could it be a three? It's open to interpretation. So that's unfortunate for them. They could have ended up with a lot more points than just what they had. And even at saying that, the game was, 68-36. So hopefully the Wrath can bounce back from this next week. They did finish the weekend one of the only teams with a positive games, like won versus lost from the weekend, but you still want to see them do it a little bit better than this. I think this match shows that you can't stop Ty McGee scoring a lot, but you can contain how much he is going to score. Again, 20 plus versus 17 in this game, and then if he's not able to score, the rest of the team's not able to do things either, and so the whole team's offense is messed up, and that comes from great defense from the Ozone. Match number 2 of the night is where things start to get interesting. We said that the Lava get their first couple of wins. They go up against the Rumble. The Rumble are an odd team at the moment because last weekend they got their first win, but they have been playing a lot of close games, and it still sort of is maintained by the vast majority of viewership that the Rumble maybe are a definitive worst team in the league, right? They still, because of how the league is shaking out, the bottom 4 teams are still within a shot of making the playoffs. And so, because 2 teams get eliminated, 2 teams get into the playoffs, and the bottom 4 teams are all close. So the Rumble still have a chance to get in it, but they need to win all of their games this coming weekend for that shot to be possible, right? At least 2, I think, for them to be within a shot. And right now it's not looking that way because they're 1-5, I believe it is. Maybe 1-6. We'll talk about that when we get to the power rankings, actually. But for the Lava, Bryce Moraine was back in this game, although on the evening he was on a 10 minutes, he was on a minutes restriction, which basically means there's only a certain amount of time he's allowed to play, which typically is a game-to-game thing, But for last night, he was only allowed to play 10 minutes total if they got between the two games. So the Lava won this one relatively easily. So we got some minutes, and then he got to play a little bit more in the main event. I asked Coach Josh Carlson about this, and he's given me the update that hopefully that was just for last night. Bryce Marine will be reevaluated as this week goes on, and hopefully they get good news from the medical staff, and he'll be taken off that minutes restriction for the final weekend of playing in the playoffs. I would be wary of that just because this is a aggravated injury. He's already looking a little bit uncomfortable out there. Coach Kirsch, who was on commentary for this evening, does point out over the course that Bryce Marine is getting into positions. He's getting freestyles off, he's getting some points, but by and large, once he's in the tramps, he's looking to pass back out. And that's just a nervousness thing with how his legs are probably feeling. So, unfortunate for him, but it's good that he's back. It's good that this might only be a temporary minutes restriction. We might be seeing more of him as this upcoming week, comes to a head. But the game itself started out with a big lead for the Lava. It was 15-0, all coming from Jihad Shockley. Really good from the Lava. It wasn't all solo play. It's not like a Ty McGee game or to an extent Keith McGee game and stuff like this where they're just going at, or Tony Crosby in the early of the season. Not that they're just going at the stopper. It was a team play thing, and Jihad Shockley was making the most of the opportunities that were coming to him through the team's structure and their system that they're going with. It was hammered home by Coach Kirsch on commentary that Josh Carlson, head coach of the Lava, has implemented a new strategy now for week 3 with the confirmation that Bryce Marine, is basically not out, but he can't be the focal point of your offense. And so it was a lot of one tramp lobs. It was a lot of cuts in from the side, tramps sort of low and at the basket. So using the bit of trampoline that's right at the baseline on either side to propel you in rather than going any higher up. So that's the new strategy from the Lava. A lot of stuff close and around the rim so that the stopper doesn't get a chance to react. And Jihad Shockley was benefiting from that hugely. The other thing that the team was doing well with, I should say, is that once he started to be a focal point offensively, and it was clear that he was scoring a lot, again, 15-0 just from Shockley in the first quarter, he can then be a diversion tactic, so the defense is looking for him to be the scorer, which allowed guys like Nathaniel Harris coming off the bench to get their own scoring options because the stopper's too busy going, where's Shockley, where's Shockley, where's Shockley? He cuts in, stopper goes to Shockley, ball goes to Harris, easy basket, and that's sort of what you're looking at. You also had incredible defense from a guy in Faisal Shafat, who obviously has been talked about. Even in poor Lava performances, his numbers speak for themselves. He is being seen as like a top 3 stopper in the league, despite how his team's playing. And these 2 wins last night really went a long way to proving that. And this one in particular, he had 9 stops and 11 LBRs, some big blocks in the air, but he was also looking to disrupt the offense in and around the tramps. But it'll be a lot clearer when we get to the second game. This game ended 61-43, and that's because the Rumble started to pull themselves back into it. When we start talking about the main event matchup, you'll see how good the Lava can be. But this game was going so well for them that Shafat got rest in the final couple of minutes. I think the stopper is a position where you can come to a team midway through a season, and if you're a good stopper, you can have an impact, right? You do not need to be accustomed to a team's defensive setup to be a good stopper. But if you have a good stopper and you don't have depth at that position, you do want to rest the guy. Gage Smith gets rest when they can. Faisal Shafat gets rest when they can. Other teams have alternative options. Taekwon Scott doesn't really get an opportunity to rest for the Buzz because their games get played quite close. This was the first opportunity Shafat has had a chance to get any rest in the game because the Lava jumped out to such a big start. And by the looks of things, that's going to be how they need to play going forward. Big starts and then maintain that, because part of this new system as well is that when they go up, they want to stay up, which may sound obvious, but they basically start to run out the clock as soon as they've got a double-digit advantage, right? They want to use all of their offensive possession, the 20 seconds of shot clock they get to their advantage. And by doing that, first of all, it means you can set up your offense a lot more comfortably. Second of all, if you've got this lead, you aren't as frantic about, we need to score, we need to score, we need to score, we need to stay in it, we need to go up, we need to do this, we need to do that. You can just sit back and say, we're in the lead, We can take our time. That play's not gone the way we want it to. Let's reset. There we go. We've got 2 points out of it. We've got 3 points out of it. We had a 4-point shot. Oh, look, it's gone in. That's great. You're far less worried about that when you're up high than when you're fighting for your life, right? And that's the difference. Happily, they use up that shot clock. I think that's a really good thing. From the Rumble side of things, not much to shout about from this game. They still need a better stopper solution because Tamyrick Fields is too good as a gunner and a scorer to have him always playing back there, and he's also not... He is fine at stopper, but he is not good enough to not get taken advantage of, and that's even with the reps he's been getting over the last couple of weeks. Tippins Hill coming from the top and the side tramps on one tramp lobs, or just on his own taking it at the hoop. That's still their like primary offense, and it went a long way to pulling them back into it because they were 38-19 at half, which was a lot better than the first quarter had ended. Outside of him, you weren't seeing too much. You were seeing Richard Washington shoot some fours and do okay with it, but the team struggled a lot more this game, and there wasn't that. I think it was just really good defense was the big thing. On the defensive end for the Rumble, I said their stopper situation is concerning. What they were doing well, they played some minutes of defense on the padded sections inside the tramp. So you had a guy sometimes on the island getting in the way of Paxton Henry, who was playing a lot of the offense through the island. But you also had guys who were on the other strips of padding in between the trampolines. You can stand there on the defensive end. And they were sort of getting their hands in passing lanes and just disrupting a bit. With how low the ball tends to get passed from the lava, they don't really pass it in the air. They pass it at tramp level so that you're going up with the ball already rather than having to catch it in the air. That requires precision and timing and speed. And if you've got guys who are waving their arms in the way, making it difficult for your handler or whoever's trying to make that possession work from the island, then that can be a really good disruptive tactic. And the Rumble maybe should have gone back to that more often than they did in this game. It might have ended closer. Speaking of games that could have ended closer, we go to the main event matchup, Lava Ozone. Right? Lava, they start the game with a 35-2 half. The first half of the game is 35 points for the Lava, 2 points to the Ozone. And based on I believe Trevor Anderson shouts at them right as they're coming back to the second half, we haven't scored yet. So those 2 points I think were off of a violation. So they gave away Lava gave away a face-off, they blocked the face-off, but then they gave away a second violation, they gave away 2 points. I think that's the only reason the Ozone got any score. Early on, Keenan Love again for the Ozone, not just because I've interviewed this guy, but genuinely if you watch him play, he got really good stops early on for his team, really good at disrupting the Lava offense. We talked about a lot of it was coming from that bottom tramp, a lot of it was single tramp lobs with guys coming from the side. Sometimes they would do this thing where two guys would jump in the bottom tramp and it would be timed in a way that it gives the second guy a boost on the bounce. And Keenan Love disrupted the first 3 possessions that were all in and around that space. It's just hard to do that for a full game, and you need to be able to score on the other end as well. And I think that Keith McGee really disappeared in this matchup compared to the other games that he'd had this weekend. I think a lot of that's down to Faisal Shafat again underneath the basket. You know, Coach Kirsch was talking in game 1 for the Ozone that what Keith McGee excels at is understanding the timing of when to jump into the tramps and when to get that bounce differential against the stopper. And so he's really good at that, but Faisal Shafat on this night was just a little bit better. And it's one of those games where some guys will have it down one night, some guys will have it down the other night. Shafat had it down on this particular evening and it threw off McGee's game. And that's just, it's unfortunate for him, but it shows how good of a stopper, that Shafat is. And it's nice that he finally gets the opportunity to show that in a main event matchup. He ends the game with 11 stops, 8 loose ball retrievals and 10 points. Really close to having our second triple-double ever after, 2 days in a row. But he does end with a double-double, which is impressive from a stopper that came with points and not stops and LBRs, which has been sort of the standard this season. I mentioned at the tail end of the Lava Rumble game that a lot of the offense was going through Paxton Henry on the island. So We talked about this rejigged offense from the lava being a lot of cuts from the bottom and not focusing on individual players, but movement in that space and multiple cutters and passes coming from the island. And a lot of that comes down to the play of Paxton Henry and him being able to get those passes off from the island space. I will preface this by saying he does get away with travels. His feet move a lot when he's on that island. The question is, are the referees even looking for that? Because they've got so much else to pay attention to. But you want to try and shore him up on that because he could end up giving away some violations at key moments in playoff games, for example. But really good thus far in terms of the first night of action. Again, this game ends. So I talked about the first half started 35-2. The game ends 61-21, a 40-point win for the Lava. Incredible when they've not won anything up until last night. So great from them. The offense is moving around the island, moving around the baseline, with the pass coming from the island and from Paxton Henry. A lot of single tramp lobs, stack ones, which is where a guy comes from the side tramp, goes to the top tramp, and then receives an alley-oop as he's going over the island. A lot of misdirections with guys cutting in and around that bottom tramp to throw off the stopper. Bringing up Faisal Shafat into just around half court, which allows Paxton Henry to get onto that island, and then a pass can be played over the perimeter defense to Henry, which means that he doesn't need to spend time trying to dribble his way to the island. It can just be that he just gets the ball there immediately, and then there's less to think about. So that's really good. And then again, trying to use up the clock whenever they have a lead and an offensive possession, because that makes the Lava more comfortable. It makes them more likely to win. It's smart play. Is it fun to watch? Not necessarily, but I think it's nice that there's been seemingly a huge number of Lava fans and they're finally getting something positive coming their way. So great job for the Lava. On the Ozone end of things, like I said, Keenan Love did really well early on, but it's hard to keep that up, that momentum for an entire game. Basically, at halftime, Coach TA says to them, look, we are getting every single one tramp lob we could possibly ask for, and we're not finishing them. And I think he's putting that down to you're not converting these passes that we're making. The added part of that is obviously Faisal Shafat as a stopper. They come out way more aggressive to begin the second half. You know, with Q Cotton and Keith McGee going right at Shafat and Brian Bell Anderson really benefiting from being the second guy cutting in off of passes on the island, where he's sort of blazing in, getting the ball, spraying up over the defense. He's really benefiting from that. Unfortunately, being down obviously by 33 points at halftime, that's just a lot to overcome. I think Coach Kirsch was saying that the goal should be, if you've got a quarter left to play, you need to be down no more than 19 points. You want to be down by less than 20 for a chance to win. And so starting a half down 33 is not great for the Ozone. But their game earlier in the night against the Wrath was way more encouraging than this one against the Lava. This was just the Lava's night. This was a proving ground. This was win or go home for them. They finally got some wins on the board, and my goodness, it has jumped them up the standings. Not just the standings, but our power rankings here at Bounce Off. So let's get into these a little bit. We start with number 1, and if you're watching us on YouTube, it'll be here on the right-hand side of myself, left-hand side of the screen for you. If you're listening on podcasting apps, don't worry, I'll go through it one by one from 1 to 8. First place, obviously the Mob. They got 4 wins, 0 losses on the weekend yet again, which leaves them with 12 wins, 0 losses for the season. They have not moved since last week, where they were first in the league and where they will continue to be first in the league probably all season. Still undefeated. They've officially clinched a bye in the first round of the playoffs and that first seed. It's a mixture of defense and offense. Some excellent play from Gage Smith this weekend, but I think a big thing to take away as well is that there weren't any standout individual performances from the rest of his teammates, because it is a group thing. It is, we know our roles, we know our goals, we know what we're aiming to do. We're going to go out there and execute to the best of our ability. And the fact that their coach is still so positive about what they've done, but is also saying, look, we can be better, that's really encouraging for that team's energy going forward. And my one concern is they're starting to get a bit cocky, and if any team has a right to do it, it's the team that might go undefeated. But that's maybe a concern if their head's no longer in winning and it's instead in embarrassing the opponent. I don't like that. Maybe I'm reading too much into that. It's very minor, but they're starting to wind up some people, and maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. We'll see how it progresses into week 4. Second in my power rankings are the Buzz. They stay at number 2. They had a not so great weekend of going 1 and 2. Still the second best scorer in the league though at 7 wins and 4 losses overall. They haven't gone a weekend without a win, which is a really good sign because some of the other teams have maybe lost out 2 in a row. This is really good. They have the third best point differential in the league at -8, and they have come up against the Mob 3 times, which is where 3 of their 4 losses come from. Keep that in mind. If you win, you're more likely to see the better teams, which means you're more likely to see the Mob, just based on how the scheduling for this league works. Not only in terms of main event matchups, where obviously the 2 best teams on a night are going against each other, but also in terms of weekly schedule making from the league. They're trying to create parity. They want good teams to play good teams so that lesser good teams can play lesser good teams, and some teams will get wins and others won't, and it'll balance out a little bit, right? So the Buzz would be 7-1 if they hadn't played the Mob. Obviously, you can't really take that hypothetical because that also means they would have played a lot less games than they should have done. But the point being, they're losing games by a lot to the Mob, and they're not losing to anyone else other than the Slashers, who we'll get into in a minute. Third place on the board, up 5 spots from where I had last week, are the Wrath. They went 2-1 on the weekend, which leaves them at 5-4 on the season. Really good to see Ty McGee back for this team, and that's the main reason they've jumped up from 8th to 3rd again this week. Last weekend, if you listened to us talk about power rankings, I was talking a lot about it comes down to how good your team looks like they're going to be going forward, and the injury concerns for the Wrath were so major last week, not as bad this weekend, which is a great sign, but they were so bad last weekend that you had to think, if this persists, there's no way that they can be competitive. But Ty McGee comes back, immediately has 2 30-point games for them in a winning night. And then even in a game where they didn't win, he still scores 17. That's really good. Largely contained by the Ozone in that game where he scored 17, and yet he still scored 17. So him being back is a massive, massive thing for this team. They can win through him. Him and Darian Slade are a great 2-man game. You hope for more returns this week, especially because the stopper position is a real concern for them. I think they're 3rd just because they finished the weekend with a winning record, versus who we're now going to talk about in 4th, which is the Slashers. They're down 1 spot from last weekend, and that's just because the Wrath have bounced back while the Slashers have maybe stayed where they were. By that, I mean they went 1 win, 2 losses on the weekend, which leaves them at a 500 rating of 5 wins and 5 losses. Tony Crosby II is still an elite offensive player, still probably the face of this league, still a MVP candidate in most seasons of SlamBall. The pairing with Laubacher has been excellent, but we did see how their offense can struggle when TC2 gets taken out of things. So if he's not playing well in a particular game, if the defense is swallowing him up, if he maybe starts to get knocked or get some injuries, that's going to look really bad for scoring from the Slashers' perspective. But if TC2 can keep himself going, if Bradley Laubacher can stay involved, if Alonzo Scott and Amir Smith can be great 3rd and 4th options, this team can be very, very good. And the 4th place is still excellent for them. Jumping up 2 spots to 5th, we have the Lava. Now, why were they only at 7th for me last week, despite still having not won a game? Just because they'd been so close in all their matchups, and now that they've had 2 massive wins, first by 18 points and then by 40 in their first night of wins, that is a really encouraging thing for this team going forward. That gives them a lot of energy. That makes them think they can win next weekend as well. They went 2-1 of the weekend. That makes them 2-5 in the league, and I do believe did jump them to 5th in the league as well, above the other teams. I think this week my power rankings are the same as the rankings in terms of win-loss. That's not how it's going to be every week. We talked about that last week in terms of me being down on the Wrath, etc. But this week it just so happens I think every team is in the right direction based on where they are in the standings. Faisal Shafat is a top 3 scorer. The offense just needs to get a little bit more... Sorry, he's a top 3 stopper. The offense for the Lava just needs to get a little bit more complete. And going away from thinking Bryce Marine will save us to let's play through the bottom tramps and cutting along the baseline, that's really helped them out a lot. In 6th place, we have the Ozone. That's where they were last week. That's where they were the week before. They had really high energy wins above. Like, they have really high energy as a team Again, I don't like that sometimes, but it shows confidence. It shows that they're ready for like games where they need to feel like, yeah, we can win this. Of course, we can win this. We're the Ozone. Yeah, we're 2-6. Yeah, we went 1-2 over the weekend, but we're the Ozone. We can win. That energy is really good for them and is what puts them at 6th. The original suspicion I had of the 2-stopper strategy is paying off for them now because they've now got 2 options who are both comfortable in that role. Keith McGee can be a beast at scoring. Brian Bell Anderson has improved leaps and bounds in terms of the scoring end as the season's gone on, and Q Cotton and Marcus Gray are great additions. In that case, we're talking about 6 guys on a 7-man roster who you think can contribute to a winning team. It just so happens that the wins haven't come in bunches for them yet. The Griffs, they went 1-2 on the weekend. They are now 2-6 on the season as a whole. They've gone down 2 spots into the 7th position. Basically, them and the Lava have swapped. They're still struggling to put the pieces together from an offensive standpoint. They have Keyshawn Jones, who's an amazing scorer. They have Justin Holmes, who's a great assist guy, while also being able to score when he needs to and playing big in big moments like the overtime win that they had on Friday night. They've got Adam Stanford, who if you give him more minutes and give him more drives, should get more points. The problem is they haven't been able to build an offense around those 3 guys yet. They still get flummoxed when things start to go a little bit wrong, and they're now using a secondary stopper in Matthew Wilkerson because Connor Hollenbeck went down with an injury this weekend. And as a guy who a lot of people early doors thought was one of the best stoppers in the league, that's a big thing you're going to have to be worried about as you go into the last weekend of regular season and our first ever playoffs in revitalized SlamBall. That's an exciting sentence to say. Number 8 in the league for my power rankings are the Rumble. They went 0-2 in the weekend, which leaves them at 1-6 overall. They went down 4 spots based on how they played last week. I was really high on them last week. I thought that the win that they got in on the Sunday night was going to give them a lot of momentum, and it just hasn't carried over. Still definitely improvement from week 1, but not as big an improvement from week 2 to week 3. So there's a slight concern with that. I think a lot of people have been saying that they're the worst team in the league. I think Tippins Hill is an amazing offensive player. I think Tamyrick Fields shouldn't have to play stopper, but he does, and that puts him in an unfortunate position. I think if Richard Washington could hit 4s at a higher clip, he's already probably the best 4-point shooter in the league, but you just need more from him. We spoke to Jayton Williams last week on the pod, and I think you'd like to see him do a little bit more. They've got some pieces, they just can't put it together, and the biggest part of that is not having a full-time stopper that they can rely on. That is the power rankings here on Bounce Off. Before we get out of here, let's talk about players of the week. Let's talk about our team of the week. That will appear on my right here right now. You'll see it if you're watching on YouTube. We'll get into it in just a second if you're listening. Before we jump in totally, I want to give some honourable mentions. They come from Taekwon Scott of the Buzz. Obviously, his team went 1-2 over the weekend. He had 11 loose ball retrievals or loose ball recoveries and 10 stops in a loss to the Mob on Thursday. And then 11 loose ball recoveries, 8 stops and 3 points in a win over the Slashers on the Saturday. These are some really good numbers for him. Unfortunately, he struggled in the main event matchup against the Mob on the Saturday. He only had 5 stops in that game and he didn't really have any other great counting stats. But that came down to he was pretty banged up after the way that the night had gone for him. Injured shoulder, injured wrist, but still really good. There were just 2 stoppers who played a little bit better than him this weekend that I want to shine a light on. So Taekwon Scott, first honourable mention. Second honourable mention is Keith McGee of the Ozone. He was originally the handler that I had in the team of the week 4, right? I had him at handler, but when I started to look at the numbers a little bit more, there's a reason that he has been replaced in that starting lineup. He had 19 points, 4 LBRs and 3 assists in a loss to the Slashers on Thursday night. In their game against the Wrath on Sunday, 34 points and 6 LBRs. Really big offensive game from him, and we know he can explode for 30-point performances when it matters. So Keith McGee, really good. His team went 1-2, and in that main event matchup against the Lava, he disappeared. He did not get much score. He had a big punch in those earlier games, but he didn't really do anything against Faisal Shafat in the game against the Lava on Sunday. So that's kind of why he got moved out of the starting 4, because the other handler, who we'll talk about in a second, he contributed more in losses than McGee did necessarily. And the last guy I want to mention is Josh Shannon for the Lava. Again, they went 2-1 on the weekend. In their loss to the Wrath on Friday, he had 19 points, 11 LBRs, and 4 hits, which was a really good numbers for a guy who you don't always notice is playing. And then the win, or that's not fair on him, you don't always notice him as a focal point. But in that loss, that's a really good stat line for him. And then the win over the Rumble Saturday in Game 1, or in Game 2 of the night, 17 points, 2 LBRs, and 1 hit. So those are decent numbers as well. So Josh Shannon, another honourable mention. So those are the honourable mentions: Taekwon Scott, Keith McGee, and Josh Shannon. On to the actual team of the week. Stopper should not be a surprise to anyone. It's Gage Smith, whose team, the Mob, went 4-0. He is the only Mob player on the team of the week this time around, and the reason for that is purely because the team was more spread out in their success this week versus previous weeks where Cam Hollins has maybe scored 30 in a game, or Justin Holloway's got a huge number of assists, or Darius Clark's averaging 35 points for the weekend. Things like that have happened previously. This weekend, it was far more spread out. Gage Smith was the focus of the entire league this weekend, so I felt like it was appropriate to only have one Mob player, even though they are by far the best team in the league. I think instead we can look at some other good performances. But Gage Smith records the first ever triple-double in SlamBall history in the main event matchup against the Buzz on Saturday. He had 10 points, 16 loose ball recoveries, which is an insanely big number, and 11 stops, as well as tacking on 2 steals on top of that. He finished that triple-double with a face-off against Taekwon Scott, pulling off a move called the McNasty. I will always forget to call it that because to me it's just a 360 between the legs dunk, because that's already sick. But it's called the McNasty in SlamBall. He'd never done it before. This was his first attempt at doing it. It was over a really good stopper in Taekwon Scott, and it was specifically done because this face-off was created by Taekwon Scott fouling Gage Smith, and he then told his coach, I want to embarrass him on TV. And that's the attitude that Gage Smith went into that face-off with. So 360 between the legs dunk, by all means, sure, go for it, young man. In terms of the other games, he didn't only have one good game this weekend. On the Thursday night game against the Buzz, he had 12 points, 14 LBRs, and 8 stops, so 2 stops away from a triple-double again. In the main event on Thursday night against the Slashers, his scoring wasn't as high, but he still had 8 LBRs and 8 stops. And then in the first game on Saturday, before that main event triple-double, he had 12 points, 7 LBRs, and 10 stops against the Ozone. So again, 3 loose ball recoveries away from a triple-double. This guy's stats are insane. Almost a shoe-in to be MVP unless something goes horribly wrong for him this last weekend. But you kind of have to expect that Gage Smith's got that tied up with a nice pretty bow. Handler for this team of the week, who bumped Keith McGee out of this starting 4? Well, it was Tony Crosby the second. The Slashers went 1-2 on the weekend, which was the same record as Keith McGee. These were by far the 2 best handlers in the league this weekend, and so the team standings and wins didn't matter as much. When you start to look at the individual performances, Tony Crosby II had one of the most complete, most impressive individual stat lines of the weekend, possibly of the season, in the win over the Ozone on Thursday night for the Slashers. He had 31 points, 6 assists, 4 loose ball recoveries, and 5 hits, which is just all over the place, all over the board. Really nice, middling stats in a lot of categories, and then a huge amount of scoring. In the main event against the Mob, again, we talked, Keith McGee kind of disappeared in their main event matchup against the Lava. In the Slashers main event matchup against the Mob, Tony Crosby had 12 points, 8 LBRs, and 7 hits. So even if he wasn't able to contribute to a win on the scoring side of things, he was just going at them defensively. And that's something you like to see from a guy even when they're down. And then a loss to the Buzz on Saturday, he had 19 points, 3 assists, and 3 hits. So, he's sort of balancing out what Keith McGee was doing just to compare those 2 handlers. Those are 2 guys that at the handler position are all SlamBall League team worthy. I just felt that, Keith McGee was in that spot. And then when you look at the production that Tony got, even in a loss, versus the production that Keith got in a loss, there's one guy's doing a little bit better than the other. We then get to Gunners. We'll start with Keyshawn Jones, whose team went 1-2 on the weekend. That's the Griffs. He just had some massive, massive games on the Friday night. In the overtime win against the Rumble, he had 29 points and 9 LBRs. If he hadn't been playing so well and being so scrappy and getting all those loose balls and scoring on the other end, they would not have had an opportunity to win that game in the overtime face-off scenario. Credit to Justin Holmes for winning that. His other stats weren't that good on the weekend, but Keyshawn Jones is the guy who got them into that position. And then in the main event loss to the Wrath on that Friday night, he had 37 points, 5 LBRs, and 5 hits. So again, doing it on both ends, getting a lot of scoring, but also getting a lot of hits in. Now, I just said the Griffs lost to the Wrath on Friday night. Who did they lose to? Well, they lost to the other gunner of the week in Ty McGee. The Wrath needed a little bit of credit because they were one of only 2 teams that went 2-1 on the weekend. He had 34.7 assists, 4 LBRs, and 2 hits in a win over the Lava on Friday. And then the main event win over the Griffs on Friday, he had 31 points, 4 assists, 5 LBRs, and 5 hits. So again, like we were saying about Tony the Crosby, the second of the slashers. Like we said about him having a lot of middling stats for a lot of categories, same for Ty McGee, but big scoring numbers across 2 games on Friday. And then even though they lost to the Ozone, and even though his teammates got shut out, he still had 17 points, 3 assists, 5 LBRs, and 2 hits, which are decent numbers in a loss, okay? If we're comparing them to the other guys, that's decent numbers in a loss, right? So Ty McGee and Keyshawn Jones, your 2 gunners for the week. And then your 5th man, representing the only other team to get a positive win-loss record on the weekend with 2-1, it's Faisal Shafat from the Lava, a top 3 stopper in this league, first of their 2 wins of the season, and they came on his back. In game 1 yesterday, he had 9 points, 11 at loose ball recovers, 3 points, he had 9 stops, 11 loose balls recovered, 3 points, 1 assist and 1 steal. And then the main event win, like we said, he had a double-double, near triple-double with 11 stops, 8 loose balls recovered, 10 points and 3 assists. A really good weekend for Faisal Shafat and a really good weekend of SlamBall. Every team brought something to the table, and as the weeks are progressing, we're seeing it get closer and closer between some of these teams. I'm really excited for weekend 4. The playoffs, do you know what? I am excited for the playoffs because it's a new experience for everyone involved, including myself and the players and the coaches and the fans and everything. Really excited for that. But that will also mean that this first season back is over, and we don't know if we're going to have to wait, months, or if we're going to have to wait a year until we get another set of games. And I would really hate to see these guys get rusty, and I would really hate to not be able to talk about this sport day in and day out with people on Twitter or here on Bounce Off. So that's been our coverage of week 3 of SlamBall. We will have more in depth about specific questions like what are we considering for MVP? What team is closest to beating the mob? How much should we care about statistical data, and how much should we care about referee calls in this league? We'll talk about things like that on This Week in SlamBall, which is getting recorded tomorrow, might go up on Wednesday. We'll just see how things go. Excited to have that conversation. Excited for more SlamBall. Talk to me on Twitter. Go to the link in my bio to join Lone Ranger's Discord and talk SlamBall, or to find the stats page for the league outside of their own website. Thank you for joining me on Bounce Off. Comment some stuff down below. Review us on Spotify if you can do that, or on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to podcasts. Tell friends that like SlamBall that this show exists, because this is a way for us to have conversations about the sport. Thank you for loving this thing as much as I do. Thank you for listening and watching. Have a beautiful rest of your month.